Losarla Tashi Dele. That's Tibetan for Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Today is the first day of the Lunar New Year, which corresponds closely with the new Aquarian year, which began just a couple of weeks ago. To preface today's lecture, I wanted to mention that because a new year represents a new beginning, a cycle that has begun. And that's why in the West we've always symbolized the new year as a newborn child. But as the Master Samael told us in his writings, we can learn very little from birth. But from death we can learn everything. When there is a birth, for example, a new year beginning, that beginning was only made possible by the ending of the former year. That great cycle of beginning and ending is at the basis of all things, on every level of nature. Everything begins and ends in great cycles, great circles or spirals. So no matter where we look in nature, at any level of the universe, we find beginnings and endings. In the midst of those beginnings and endings are great progressions or movements of energy. Those movements of energy form a continuum, a flow that has no beginning and no ending, but are instead a series of beginnings and endings. Our mind struggles to conceptualize the infinite, and yet time is that. It is an infinite circle. It has no beginning, it has no ending. But it is a series of beginnings and endings. That clue is at the very heart of gnosis. The comprehension or cognizance of birth and death. Not only birth and death of a physical body, but birth and death of a soul, of a planet, of a universe. For the next few lectures that I give, I'm going to explore and analyze the subject of death. Death has many aspects, many facets. We will analyze and study the death of our physical bodies. I know it's an uncomfortable subject, but it shouldn't be. In reality, for the serious Gnostic, death is the goal. Death is our crown. It is the crowning achievement of a Gnostic. That's not to say that the Gnostic seeks death in and of itself, for itself, meaning that we just want to all rush out and be killed. That's not the meaning. Because at the same time that the Gnostic seeks death, the Gnostic preserves life and does everything in his or her power to protect life, including their own. What the Gnostic aspires towards is a perfect death. Is a death at the right moment, at the right time. Because that perfect death is the gateway to real existence. The existence that we have now is not real. It's an illusion. What we see as existence is fundamentally mistaken. What we see and perceive and taste and touch and hear is all filtered by subjective elements in our psyche, and thus we do not see reality. through a perfect death, we gain that perception of what is real. The goal of the Gnostic is to achieve that perfect death and to prepare for it every day. It can be said that Gnosis is training for death. And it is a process of dying. For the real Gnostic who's practicing seriously, whether that person is called Gnostic or a Buddhist or a Christian is irrelevant. By Gnostic, we mean someone who is acquiring spiritual experience. For that person, their spiritual process is a process of dying, not physically, but psychologically. A continual process of radical death, in which all that is illusion, all that is false, dies. And what is born is truth, cognizance of what is real. In order to begin to experience that process of death, we need to study death. We need to understand death and not avoid it. Culturally, we avoid death. The very subject of death makes us uncomfortable. We do our best to ignore it, to avoid it. And this is to our great detriment. This is a very significant indicator of profound ignorance when we want to avoid the subject and topic of death. And we find it becomes more pronounced as we age. Amongst old people, we often find the tendency to not use the word old. They want to say, I'm 80 years young. And we smile and think it's cute, but really it's foolish. It's an indicator that the person is not willing to recognize their achievement of being old, and also what is waiting for them, which is death. The elderly should be respected and honored, and yet they aren't, because we don't want to face our own mortality. We prefer not to deal with older people, and when we do, we want to deal with them as quickly as possible and be done with it. And that's why in Western culture we find the tendency to put older people somewhere where we don't have to see them all the time. And put sick people where we don't have to see them all the time. In traditional times, in ancient times, the sick and the elderly were cared for in the home. And now we don't do that. We want to put them somewhere where we don't have to see them. And this is a signal of our ignorance, of our aversion to reality, because we don't want to deal with the fact that we ourselves will die. We have no cognizance of death, no comprehension of death, but we have a lot of ignorance of death. The Gnostic tradition teaches and emphasizes the importance of death because of its great importance in the spiritual path. To be a truly experienced spiritual practitioner, you cannot avoid death. In fact, you have to embrace it. For the real spiritual practitioner, someone who's got experience, in other words, a true Gnostic, death ceases to be a source of fear. Contemplate that, because for most of us, death is a source of great fear and uncertainty. We are terrified because we ignore. We don't know what will happen. We're very afraid. And we're afraid because of our attachments. We're afraid because of pain. We're afraid because we don't know what will happen. We don't want to lose our families and our loved ones.